ready to introduce our next speaker, Jonathan Balcombe. Jonathan Balcombe is a biologist, author, and lifelong animal advocate. He has a PhD in ethology from the University of Tennessee, where he studied communications in bats, one of my favorite animals. Shout out to Bat Conservation International. I am a longtime member. He has published over 50 journal articles and book chapters ranging from turtle nesting behavior to the ethics of animal dissection. His 2006 book, Pleasurable Kingdom, is the first in-depth examination of animals' capacity to enjoy life. His subsequent books, Second Nature and The Exultant Ark, also present animals in a new light and presage a revolution in the human-animal relationship. His latest book, the New York Times bestseller, What a Fish Knows, explores the private lives of the planet's most misunderstood and maligned vertebrates. Balcombe is Director for Animal Sentience with the Humane Society Institute of Science and Policy based in Washington, D.C. He is also a founding editor of Animal Sentience, the first scholarly journal of animal feeling. Please, let's give a warm Atlanta welcome to Jonathan.
Thank you, Lee. Can everybody hear me? Somebody else in the room has control over my mic. Can you hear me? All right, great. If for some reason I'm not audible at some point, just put your hand up, let me know, because either I'll take that but it sounds like it's working, so we're in good shape. Thanks for taking time out of your day to come and hear me today and be a part of this fantastic fest. I've been to a bunch of Veg Fest this year, and they all seem to have the same trend. They're getting bigger and they get crowded really quickly, which I guess is a good thing. Definitely a good thing. Okay, I'm going to launch right in here because time is limited. So that is if my slides will advance. Let's see. Is there an on switch? Maybe that's the problem. I don't have this design. I'll let you do that. Okay, let's see. Great. We generally view fishes through one of two contexts, as a source of food or a source of recreation. My own brief career with fishing didn't last because when it came time to bait my own hooks with wriggling worms and pull them out of fishes' faces, I lost enthusiasm. I just couldn't help seeing it from their perspective. I'm having a little trouble with this slide advancer. At that time, in the late 60s, early 70s, my family was making pretty regular trips to McDonald's, and I always had the filet-o-fish sandwich. And unlike the fishes on the end of the fishing hook, who I caught during my brief fishing career, the fishes who went into this thing were anonymous to me. I must say, it's quite impressive how much kale and green leafies they put in that thing, isn't it? Oh dear, what's going on here? This thing is giving me grief. I try not to show all my slides ahead of time. At that time, McDonald's was boasting 1 billion served. Of course, they were referring to customers, but they could just as soon have been referring to chickens or fishes. I remember seeing stacks of tuna in the supermarket, and you can still see them just like this today. And having no clue what a tuna was, I just assumed it was like a sardine, a little tiny fish, not a up to 1,500-pound apex predator who hunts coordinatedly, can swim faster than a tiger can run, and they even warm their eyes up so they can see better in deep water conditions to see their prey. They do some amazing things. And I always thought it was a little ironic that we had dolphin-safe tuna campaigns, but I'd never heard of a tuna-safe tuna campaign. So today I want to encourage you to see fishes through a new lens. I've spent much of the last 5 years swimming among, researching, and writing about fishes, culminating in this book, What a Fish Knows. And I can't share too much in my 3.5 hours lecture time that I have today, but I can at least share a few highlights of this study. There are a number of superlatives that can be applied to fishes. I'll just share a few of my favorites. Arguably the smallest vertebrate on Earth goes to this little species, some lakes around the Philippines. You can put 300 adults on one side of a scale, or you could, I don't recommend it, and an American penny on the other side, and the American penny will go down. Superlative. This is not superlative today. I have my own. It's very old and clunky. I might go and get it. This is the new record holder for longevity among vertebrates. This is a Greenland shark, and 23, I think it was 23 specimens, eye specimens were removed from incidentally caught specimens, animals from fishing nets a couple of years ago, and the scientists measured the number of corneal layers on the eyes. Corneal layers on a shark's eyes are laid down just like tree rings are, so you can get an accurate reading of the animal's age. One of the females in this sample had 392 corneal layers. So this individual, when she was approaching her 400th birthday, was still a healthy animal presumably caught in a fishing net. So sad that they met their untimely end at that age. The longest fish name, as far as I know, goes to the Hawaiian reef triggerfish. The locals call it the Humu Humu Nuku Nuku Apua'a. There will be no quiz on that, don't worry. It's Hawaiian apparently for the fish who sews with a needle and grunts like a pig. Perhaps the most preposterous name of a fish goes to the sarcastic fringehead. Maybe the prettiest name goes to one of the prettiest fishes, the diagonal banded sweet lips. I don't know about you, whenever I see one, I want to give them a big kiss. Let's see, the hairy-jawed sackmouth, maybe one of the less flattering names among fishes. And that leads me to say something about perhaps the kinkiest sex system among vertebrate animals, at least, which belongs to the deep-sea angler fishes. There's about 160 known species. There are probably some yet to be described. They're very rarely encountered. They live in the largest livable habitat on Earth, which is the abyss, the deep ocean, where the sun doesn't penetrate. The light never penetrates. It's not permanently dark, however, because these fishes have symbiotic bacteria located in strategic parts of their body that they can control the lighting and turning off at different times to attract prey. It's often up in the top dorsal fin here where that light is located. But it also helps to signal to males. This is a female. It signals to males, two of which you can see here, that they may recognize their species this way. They also recognize her probably by smell, and maybe some other cues as well. But what happens is, it's very hard to find the right mate in this huge volume, dark habitat. And so if you find the right one, you want to make good on it. And what males do is they bite the female when they find her. And it's the last bite they ever take. They latch on. Over the course of weeks and months, their faces become fused into her flesh. And they literally share her bloodstream and can ultimately inseminate her intravenously, very convenient. And scientists have called this mating system, this very kinky system, sexual parasitism. I think the term doesn't quite capture the reality, because while she gets the food, she provides the blood supply, he doesn't even take out the garbage. Nevertheless, if it wasn't for the male, at least one male latching on, as you can see, sometimes two or even more can latch onto one female. If that didn't happen, her reproductive life history would be a dead end. So I don't think it's entirely parasitic. I mean, maybe she welcomes having a male latch on. Maybe it has some kind of kinky good feel to it. Nevertheless, for any radical feminists in the audience, you may take some grim pleasure in the knowledge that some males only ever do amount to an appendage. Do fishes have minds? Well, they use tools, which was not that long ago thought to be unique to humans, but fishes like this tusk fish will use water as a tool to blow sand off the bottom, to uncover an unfortunate mollusk, which is then carried to a nearby rock or a piece of coral, which is in turn used as a tool, as an anvil, to smash this mollusk open to get at the soft tissue inside. Note the bystanders, or I guess you could say byswimmers, hanging out around waiting for an opportunistic little bit at the spoils. Fishes also fall for the same sorts of optical illusions that we do. This is the Ebbinghaus illusion, in which the two orange dots are the same size, but because of the arrangement of blue rings around them, the one on the right looks larger. And if you train a fish to choose by putting its nose against or squirting water at the larger of two circles by giving them a food reward, and then present them with the Ebbinghaus illusion, they would go up and choose the one on the right. I think there's something poignant about that. It says that a fish can have beliefs, that those beliefs can be fallible. They can fall for deceptions just as we can. Fishes are often demeaned in other ways, in many ways, but certainly their memories, they're not renowned for having good memories, the infamous 3-second goldfish memory. I don't know where that comes from. It's just a human mythology. This is one of the champion memories among fishes. This is a frill-finned goby. They live in the intertidal zone, so at low tide they are hanging out in these tide pools, and it's been noticed over the years that they can jump from one pool to another accurately. They know how do they know how far and what direction to jump in? They need to do this sometimes because a predator like an octopus may come along and they want to get out of there, and they may work their way back out to the open sea even. It turns out through a number of studies that were conducted over the course of several decades in New York City, of all places, captive studies, that these fishes memorize the tide zone at high tide. So when the water comes in, they swim around over this area, they swim in the nooks and crannies, and they make a mental map. It's called a mental map of this tide. They can learn that in one day, and they can remember it 40 days later at least, without any intervening practice with that particular habitat. So it's a good way to avoid making a leap of faith and ending up suffocating on the rocks. This is another sort of form of tool use, but it also represents observational learning. Young archer fishes, named for their barrel-shaped mouth with which they can squirt water up to 10 feet to catch flying insects, which is in itself a pretty incredible skill. They're terrible at it when they're young. They have to learn this. It's not an instinctive skill that they have. But by watching experienced elders do this for many times, like 1,000 times, they become much better at it than they would be if they hadn't had the opportunity to observe that. So it's a case of observational learning. You could also describe it as an example of perspective taking the perspective of another individual. That's considered a pretty high-level cognitive feat for an animal of any sort to be able to do. By the way, they use different techniques to catch insects at different heights. If the insect is flying more than 7 or 8 inches away, they use the quarterback kind of technique where they squirt water ahead, hopefully going to catch the insect when it gets there. However, if the insect is flying very close to the water, they do a turn and shoot where they actually rotate their body at the same time as at the same rate as the insect and squirt directly at it. So it's a pretty flexible behavior depending on the circumstances. Because archerfishes squirt water at things, they're a great subject for testing preference studies. You can present them with familiar versus unfamiliar human faces, for instance, right above the tank, as we see on the right panel here, and the fish will squirt water at one of the two, depending on what they've been trained to do. In this case, squirt water at familiar face. And even if you remove the hair or the ears from these, I have to say, look quite similar looking faces, I would struggle to recognize some of these. They can pick out a familiar face amongst over 40 unfamiliar faces. So to those aquarium fish keepers who have claimed for probably centuries that they recognize me, they know it's me who's coming to feed them, we now have evidence that they not only recognize you, they recognize you by your face. And following on from that, a very recent study shows that fishes are subject to the face inversion effect. That is to say, that while they may recognize another individual face up, if you turn the face upside down, as with this rice fish on the right, they don't recognize them very well. We suffer from the same inability. We don't recognize upside down faces very well. Chimpanzees do recognize upside down faces, and this probably relates to their behavioral biology. Animals tend to be good at what's useful to them. Do fishes communicate? Yes, of course they do. This is one kind of damselfish that actually has a specially evolved covert face recognition system that is only usable under ultraviolet light. They can see in ultraviolet light. That's the spectrum shown on the right. This is actually the very same fish under visible light on the left and UV light on the right. Most other fishes, including their enemies, cannot see under UV light, so they don't. While they can recognize each other by this constellation of marks on the face, they don't give themselves away to predators. So it's a nice, convenient, covert, masquerade-type way of recognizing individuals for those members of that species. There are electric fishes who have evolved in murky water who can't see each other, so isn't it nice to have another way to communicate? And some fishes in this situation will use sounds, various sounds that fishes make, but these ones, and as well as the elephant fishes of Africa, these ones are South American, they've evolved an electric signaling system, and they will control their electric pulses. They will even stop pulsing if they're swimming through someone's territory. I think it's an example of deference in a fish. So they have a number of nuanced social behaviors that are mediated by these EODs, or electric organ discharges. Anyone ever heard of flatulent communication? Hands up? No? Okay, well, it happens all the time. It certainly happens a lot in herrings. Herrings literally they release gas from their little anuses at night. It's only at night it's been observed, and it's large schools of them that do this. So apparently herring farts convey some useful information about migrating to other parts of the water column when it's not safe to stay where you were foraging during the day. It's not fully known why they do this, but it makes for a cute little cartoon. Referential signaling is rare in nature. It's only found in a few species, and it's vanishingly rare between species, and yet it happens in the fish world. Here we have a still photo of a grouper fish, which is, there's a number of species of groupers who do this. They will do a head shake or a full body shimmy to indicate to a moray eel, probably a known moray eel who they know as an individual, that they're hungry, they want to go foraging, will you come hunting with me? That's essentially what it refers to. And it's a referential signal because it's referring to a future event in another location. If the moray is in the mood and hungry, the moray will head off with the grouper. You can watch YouTube videos of this. My technical skills are such that I don't have a video to show you, but go on YouTube and look it up. You can watch them swimming together over the reef that various amateurs and professional photographers have filmed. It looks like something out of a Disney film, and yet it's real. This was a photograph taken from a captive study done at Cambridge University. You may note that this is a laminated moray eel. This is just a realistic photo, and that allowed the researchers to control them with pulleys. And you could have cooperative moray eels and uncooperative moray eels, and they found that the groupers knew the difference, and they would choose the cooperative one the following day after being exposed to uncooperative and cooperative ones on day one. Groupers will also point to prey to indicate that there's somebody who's a little fish who swam into the reef. Will the moray eel please come over here and help me get it out? Moray eels are like ferrets. They can swim into that little tight matrix of the reef, whereas the grouper waits outside. So the poor prey fish doesn't have much option. If it goes in the reef, moray's going to pursue. If it escapes out into open water, the grouper is waiting to pounce. Ken Yong, a British blog writer and author, summed it up with a cute little jingle. If your prey's in a hole and you don't have a pole, fetch a moray. Can fishes do artwork? Yes, they can. This is a 6-foot-wide mandala-like crop circle-like structure that was discovered off the southern coast of Japan by an underwater photographer just a few years ago. And it turns out to be a previously undescribed small species of pufferfish, about 4 inches long, the male of which spends days making one of these crop circles and then a week or more maintaining it because the currents will blow the sand away if he doesn't keep working on it. The BBC has since gone and set up its cameras and filmed it beautifully. You can watch a lovely clip on YouTube of this behavior. And it's a classic sexually selected trait. It's a fish version of the peacock's tail. Males have been driven to do this fancy behavior over generations of choosy, selective females who have high-level artistic preferences and will tend to only mate with males who do really nice mandalas. If you think about it, it's really a good test of your fitness, and I mean in the evolutionary genetic sense, Darwinian-type fitness. A male who has the time, and not to mention the ability to do this, must have good genes. He must be a high-quality male, so he's worth mating with. And if when they mate, she lays the eggs here, and they cover them with bits of sand and bits of shells that they break with their mouths. And I don't know why it works. To me, it looks like a big stamp in the sand. It says, breakfast for any egg eaters, come and get them right here. But anyway, it does work because it's evolved that way. And they've since discovered many other of these mandala-like structures. There are more than one. So I've talked a little bit about communication, and don't think I want to step on that nail. There we go. Save someone else. Social behavior. What about virtue? Speaking of virtue. Can fishes be virtuous? Yes, they can. I'm lamenting the end of the Obama era, so I'm using that mantra. This is a nice illustration of virtue in a fish. This is the virtue in the form of self-delayed gratification, self-sacrifice in a way, certainly giving up something for the time being to help somebody else. These are 4 different species of rabbitfish in each quadrant, and you can see there's a pair in each quadrant. And one of the pair is face down in the reef, plucking away at algae, which is what rabbitfishes eat. It's a vulnerable position to be in. You can't see that grouper-moray combo coming to get you, but isn't it nice if you can have a lookout who's facing up, not feeding, keeping an eye out for trouble? And that's what rabbitfishes do. And if trouble comes, this lookout will make a signal and it'll quickly hurry off into the safety of the reef. If nothing happens, then after a couple of minutes, this one who's foraging will come up and this one can go down. So everybody gets fed, but everybody gets fed safely. It's a nice illustration of how nature sees to it to find solutions that are sometimes virtuous to make life safer for everybody in the group. There's also virtue in the relations of so-called cleaner fishes and client fishes on reefs. This is not only one of the most sophisticated and well-studied symbioses in fishes, it's one of the most sophisticated and well-studied symbiosis known in any animal system. And this is probably the most famous type of cleaner species. It's the blue-striped cleaner wrasse. And this pufferfish here would be what's called the client in this case. And there's more than 100 known client species. And there's various species that also do cleanings. Generally happens on reefs, but there are other examples elsewhere. Also other examples of terrestrial animals doing very similar relationships. And these, just as the grouper and the moray probably know each other, these ones probably know each other. And it's a relationship built up over time based on trust. The client here is, well, the way it works is the cleaners remove parasites and algae, et cetera, from the clients. And the client, so the cleaners get food. It's very important for them. Over the course of the day, they may service over 1,000 clients, often the same one who comes back for more. And so they get food, and the client gets a spa treatment and a parasite removal service. So everybody gains. It's a mutualism. But note the trust here. This is a predatory fish. This could easily eat this cleaner fish. And yet it's never been observed for a client to eat a cleaner. You just don't eat your business partner. It's not a good way to sustain good business relations over time. So the client invites the cleaner in with the open mouth and opens the gill covers, and in they go. And there are parasites that can lodge onto the gills, so it's very beneficial to the clients. And in some reefs, parasite loads are very high. They build up over just a few hours. And so they will come back repeatedly. But sometimes it almost seems a little addictive, the behavior. They seem to come back sooner than they probably should. The cleaners have been shown to have very good individual recognition skills and memories. They know when a client has been with them recently, and they probably won't spend as much time. They may not even be doing as good a job. So it does actually it's not just virtuous, it's also Machiavellian. Sometimes cleaners do a shoddy job. They're more likely to do a shoddy job if there aren't many clients watching. If it's a quiet day in their station, then they may do more what's called mucus nipping, where they actually take a little mote of that slimy layer on the outside of the client fish. Turns out to be quite nutritious, and they apparently really like that. Clients obviously don't like that. That's a protective layer. They don't want to have that damaged or disturbed. It will tend to make them jolt when they get a mucus nip. That probably serves 2 purposes. One is to notify the cleaner that I'm onto you, you just stepped over the bounds, please don't do any more of that. It also may signal to clients in the queue that you may want to go somewhere else today. These guys aren't doing a great job. Cleaners want to maintain their eBay ratings, so they don't do much mucus nipping if there are a lot of clients in the queue. There's probably over 150 published papers on this, various facets of this fascinating system, and I'm sure there's a great deal more to be discovered. I've only scratched the surface today. One other thing I want to point out, cleaners will mollify clients by giving them caresses with their pectoral fins. They'll stop removing parasites for a few seconds, and they'll swim over and just flutter their fins against them to give them a little massage, to make them maybe feel better, so to maybe make up for a deficit that they just sustained by biting mucus, for instance. This leads to a related study I want to describe. First, just a little bit about fish emotions and how, in my book, and I think it's important to include stories and personal accounts. It's not just science, but I describe a number of relationships people have with fishes and some encounters they've had that are telling and informative. This is Mango, a 9-year-old pufferfish. That's the one on the left. And when Mango's human comes home from work, she spends, she called them stare fests or staring contests. It looks like a love fest to me. Maybe even a veg fest, I don't know. But anyway, they would look at each other. And puffers are particular, we can really relate to them because their eyes are at the front of the face. But other fishes have emotions too. But we can study emotions such as stress. This is not a study I'm glad I was in. I'm glad I wasn't in this study. It was a study done by researchers from the University of Lisbon. But while I do not necessarily endorse studies by citing them, if I feel that they can raise our awareness of fishes and their capabilities, then I will describe them, and this is an example. 32 of these striated surgeonfishes were caught on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. That being caught is stressful enough, but being put in a bucket for 30 minutes of shallow water, which is what they were subjected to next, is very stressful. And you can measure stress in a fish by taking a small blood sample from the tail vein, and you can measure cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And the stress levels were very high after this bucket treatment. And then what the scientists did was they divided the stressed surgeonfishes into two groups, and they were put into a tank, one of two tanks. The tank had a very realistic model of a blue-striped cleaner fish, the one we saw in just a few slides ago. And you can see it mounted here. And in one tank, the cleaner fish model was attached to a motor which caused it to swish back and forth in a nice sweeping motion. The other one, there was no motor, and it just stayed stationary. Fishes, stressed surgeonfish put in with the stationary model, ignored it. But fishes put into a tank with a moving model would swim up to it on average of 15 visits over the course of an hour. Scientists need to measure stuff. And they would get caressed. They would get that equivalent of the caressing that cleaner fishes will do. And their stress levels came down. So these ones became much less stressed sooner than the ones here who didn't make any visits. They couldn't benefit from this thing. It didn't have anything meaningful to give them. So this study, pretty profound study, shows that fishes, not only can they get stressed, which was pretty well established before, but they have the wherewithal to relieve stress given the opportunity. And they will take that opportunity if they can. So just as we will go to a massage therapist for the therapy of the massage, fishes will do the same thing, or the equivalent. Which leads lastly to fish pleasure. And this is a Nassau Grouper visiting a trusted diver on a reef in Florida. And this grouper probably knows Kathy. She dives in that area repeatedly, and this individual probably has come to recognize her and trusts her. And there's probably no spearfishing in this area, otherwise this fish would be much more leery of divers. But you can see she's stroking him, or her. I don't know if it's a male or a female. And there's no parasite removal service here. So this is probably just simply the joy, the pleasure, the de-stressing of being stroked. Because life is challenging for fishes too, not just for us. And I presented that slide to a vet school in Kansas a couple of years ago, and a student came down afterwards and said, my dad and I, we pet this Nassau Grouper when we go to diving in the Caymans. I'll send you some pictures. So she sent me some pictures of her rubbing him and getting a mugging for the camera. This is a wild fish. And here's her father holding his air regulator under the gills so that the bubbles tickle over those sensitive gills. And so the fish is in cooperating and presumably enjoying that. To me, this is just absolutely at odds with how we have viewed these creatures. We viewed them as cold-blooded, unfeeling, unthinking, non-pain sensitive. And by the way, I do devote several pages of my book to the evidence for fish pain. The jury remains a little out in some circles, but really it deserves to be not out. The evidence is very clearly that fishes do feel pain. This picture and some of the studies I've cited, to me, they just absolutely refute the traditional view we've had that has relegated fishes to the cellar of vertebrate groups. Having studied this stuff for several years, I've become thoroughly convinced that fishes are equally deserving of our respect and consideration as are mammals or any other group of vertebrate animals. So having said that, let me finish up with just a little bit about our troubled relationship with fishes and what we need to do about it. I think the main reason we've relegated fishes to the cellar is because we've been alienated from them. They've been mostly out of our view. You can look out over a lake or in the ocean or a river, and there may be thousands of fishes within just inches of the surface, but they're completely out of view. We can't see them unless they jump out briefly. And they also may fail to trigger some of our sympathies. Their eyes are constantly bathed in water, so they've never needed to evolve eyelids to blink with. They do make a lot of sounds, many species, and I summarize some of those in the book. But just as when we yell underwater, we're not being very effective, we're not really being heard, their sounds are mostly out of our ambit. We're not hearing the sounds that they make in courtship or conveying other information to each other. So they've really had that disadvantage. And our history of treatment of fishes has been very utilitarian. If we can catch them, we will. We use them as much as we can. We maximize or optimize. Maximum sustainable yield is a term used in commercial fishing. Just to read the statistic here about the loss of marine life, if you know anything about the history of commercial fishing, you'll know that we'd already lost a lot before 1970. So their populations and various marine creatures' populations are in dire trouble. And a number of things are beleaguering them and their habitats, such as climate change, global warming oceans. At the same time, we're seeing ocean acidification where acid levels are rising. The oceans are actually alkaline, but they're becoming less alkaline, so it is a form of acidification. And these features are causing coral bleaching, for instance, where coral is losing its integrity. We also leave or toss a great amount of fishing material in the oceans every year, to the tune, estimated by World Animal Protection, of 640,000 tons of fishing gear a year is lost or discarded in the oceans. And a lot of it, as you probably know, continues to wreak havoc, continues to catch organisms. A more insidious problem is ocean plastics, and in particular microplastics, a product of the production of exfoliants, but also in plastic production, where we have these huge numbers, quintillions of tiny little plastic beads that just happen to look just like fish eggs, which are important prey, important food for young developing fish like this pike, whose stomach is ruptured from a buildup of these undigestible plastic beads. So that's another insidious problem. As is bycatch, you may have heard this term. This is unwanted, untargeted species. Fishing vessels often want to maximize their quota of target species, so they would typically discard this waste back into these are recently living creatures, mostly dead and dying now, back into the ocean. We produce about 200 million pounds of bycatch per day, so huge numbers. Some people think that aquaculture, the fastest growing segment of food production in the world in the last couple of decades, is an important relief on wild fish populations. But most of the fishes that humans like to eat are predatory fishes, fairly high in the food chain, tunas and salmon, for instance. And to feed them in these farms, they need to feed them huge numbers of smaller fish, almost all of which are caught in the wild, sardines, menhadens, and those sorts of things. So it doesn't really provide relief on wild fish populations. There are a number of other problems with essentially factory farming of fishes. The crowding and competition for food causes high levels of stress, which leads to so-called dropout fish, such as this salmon on the bottom, who's the same age as the one on above, but because couldn't deal with the stresses and pressures, not just the competition for food, but also the buildup of pesticides, pests, I should say, which are treated with pesticides. Pests, I meant parasites. Sea lice are very widespread, and they flourish in these high density populations of captive fishes. So this was a research paper that was done by a Norwegian team that summarized that the stress levels of these dropouts are very high and chronic, and they concluded that they're severely depressed. That was their own term that they used in the paper. So aquaculture is very problematic. Just to finish up on some of the ways that people are helping fishes, I haven't really said a great deal about sharks or their group, the sharks and rays, but they are certainly treated in the book, and they're certainly much more complex than we've thought them to be as well. Sharks also love to be rubbed. You can watch videos of wild, 10-foot-long tiger sharks swimming up to the divers to get their faces rubbed, and they blink, they close their eyes, and it's just totally un-tiger shark-like behavior if you're just listening to what Shark Week might tell you. And divers will remove hooks from sharks, like this blue shark who had this big hook removed a few minutes after this photo was taken. More and more divers are taking bolt cutters down with them. This is not something you want to try at home, but if you do your homework and learn to do it properly, these creatures may even actually know that divers can help them and may deliberately swim around them to get help. There's an ichthyologist in Alabama who got tired of putting fishes in pickle jars and preserving them and putting them on shelves. And instead, he invented this TP tank, teaching photographic tank, where they catch fishes in the field, and instead of killing them, they put them in this tank, and then they can take beautiful photos of them, that they can identify them to species, and then let them go again. So he estimates, based on the thousands of tanks that have been sold so far, that millions of fishes have been saved with this device. Really, where it comes down to it, though, the great majority of animals we kill are to eat them, about 98%. And so if we're really going to make a difference for fishes, we have to change our food habits, which is partly why I was probably invited to speak at a Veg Fest. It's very relevant. We eat huge numbers of fishes. The estimates are anywhere from 250 billion at a low end to possibly over 2 trillion at the upper end. Easy to forget that each one is a feeling individual. And I visited one of a growing number of companies earlier this year, New Wave Foods in California, that are developing alternative ways of having food, sort of not harming animals and having our food at the same time. New Wave Food has already released its first product, a Veggie Shrimp. This is all plant-based, high-tech. It's sophisticated recipes and a lot of trial and error. I tried one. I have to admit I haven't eaten a shrimp in 30 years, but it tasted shrimp-like from what I could remember what a shrimp was like. Maybe I'm not the best test subject, but in any event, Finless Foods is another one that's developing not plant-based, but in fact in vitro fish tissue, where you start with fish cells and you can carefully culture them in a lab using various techniques. And right now, the economy of scale is such that it's not a very viable, but they're already beginning to release their products. They're having taste tests, and they're going to be marketing that on the market within the next 18 months, I believe. This company already has the shrimp out with food distributors and will go retail next year or maybe even late this year. And they have a number of other products that are coming down. So there's some rapid change happening here, and it's really important that we have these choices because a lot of people simply don't want to stop eating these kinds of foods. But once they, hopefully, many of us, once we know the ills of consuming fishes directly, if we have options, we can choose those options. And that's certainly a theme we see at Veg Fest with all the really cool products and delicious products that we see. Just to finish up, I'm not going to read it, I'm going to let you read it, but Sylvia Earle is kind of like America's Jane Goodall for the oceans. She's a TED Prize winner, and I like what she says about fishes and about whether we should eat them or not. I think if we see fishes as, like other vertebrate animals, as full members of the vertebrates, as sensitive, sophisticated, complex, that we recognize that they are not just things, but beings, that they don't just have a biology, they have biographies. I think if we recognize that, we'll have a better relationship with them, and that's the kind of world I would like to live in. Thanks very much for hearing me today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your powerful message. Like I said earlier, we do have time for questions. So if you have a question, I'll ask you to come down to the front here, please, to physically get up and come down to the front so that you have access to the mic. And while folks are getting situated, I'll ask a quick question. So humans who are not vegan are eating a massive amount of fishes. But you did bring up this vector of bycatch. So 20 million pounds of bycatch per day?
200.
200 million pounds of dead animals thrown back into the water so that we can have a little bit of fish to eat? Is that a compelling...
Well, we're eating a lot of fish, as you may know. But yeah, no, I don't think it's a fair cop. I don't think it's a good equation. And most people are not aware of that. And the powerful thing about how we eat is that it's a choice we can exercise every day repeatedly. And when we do that, we're If we buy a product to eat, of course, we're telling the manufacturer, whatever you did, do it again. We're funding that, right? So we can remove our funding of those practices, and that's very empowering. So that's partly what I'm hoping people will do.
Would you go so far to say that bycatch is an inherent part of the industry as it exists?
As it exists,
yeah.
It is, yeah. I'm not sure we could catch fish in the numbers that we do without having bycatch. It's just a very crude, the methods we use are quite crude.
Yep. That is reality. All right, so we've got some awesome questions here, and we do have enough time for all of you, pretty much. I'll ask you to state your question pretty succinctly. If it's not really a question, I'm going to grab the mic back from you. And when you're done with your question, do give the mic back to me so I can queue up the next person. Sound good? Awesome, thanks.
Hey, so my question is, how do you think that all of these symbiosis relationships between, for example, the eel and the
Grouper.
fish, the grouper, or the cleaning fish and the predator fish?
Yeah, what's the question? How do they evolve?
How do scientists think these symbiotic relationships evolved over time?
I would give you a glib answer and just say because they're useful, because they benefit both parties, and evolution and by natural selection is, it's not that it's a purposeful thing, but in hindsight, it's like it's looking for better solutions. Individuals who clean and who get cleaned tend to have a better survival advantage over those who don't, and therefore their genes will tend to be passed on into the next generation, their genes for cleaning or being a client. So that's how it evolves, really.
My question actually changed. I was going to ask about that unbelievable, that's 200 million sea animals are caught as bycatch every day.
200 million pounds, if I remember the number correctly.
Yeah, sorry,
yes,
200 million pounds.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question was simply, can you go back to that slide with your contact info, please?
Oh, yeah, I tried to go back to it, and then we got bumped onto a generic. So I don't know if the gentleman up there can bump us back to that last slide with my contact info. I was trying to, I've had a difficult relationship with this thing. Definitely not symbiotic.
Yeah, it's really fine. We publish,
Thank you.
As a housekeeping note, we publish all of the information for our speakers on our social sites and on our website as well. So you can take a picture of this, and you can always reach out to us at Atlanta Veg Fest. We try to make it super transparent through all of our channels. So sure.
Thank you so much. That was an incredible talk.
Oh, thank you.
My question for you is, you gave some examples of fish behavior that suggests that they do gain comfort and that we can be gentle in our encounters with them. There's even a thing called vegan fishing now where you can actually feed them instead of having a hook and bait.
That's right, I heard of that.
So my concern with that, though, and I'd like your take on this, isn't it concerning that, should we be allowing them to become familiar with us, because the next person they meet may not be the person who's going to use bolt cutters to take out that hook or want to rub them? Yeah,
it's a great point. I think some of that vegan fishing was a little bit tongue-in-cheek or maybe hook and mouth, to paraphrase. But I think ultimately leaving them be is maybe the best policy. The fact that these scientific studies aren't exactly leaving them be is not the ideal, but nevertheless we have a big hole to dig our way out of, so maybe we have to go through that period first. But letting them do their own thing. I think observing them and witnessing that is fine, as long as we're not interfering and affecting their lives in a negative way.
So my question was going to be, besides finding lots of other people's research, which research or any while you were doing this book did you present at all? Or if you could tell us about it if it wasn't in your presentation.
I guess I would just very quickly cite one piece that I often do present. I just didn't decide to, it's so hard to choose what to include in a talk. There's so much material that could be included. The pain studies, and just very briefly describe a pain study of using zebrafishes, which are very widely used in research. By the way, I tend to favor the word fishes over fish. They're both legitimate plurals, but I don't go bird watching and saw 11 bird and 15 mammal. I say birds and mammals. It makes them individuals a little bit more. So I explain that in the book. It's just maybe it seems a little idiosyncratic or just idiotic plain, but that's what I do. So the pain study, very briefly, they had a complex tank with 2 chambers. The nice chamber where there was dim light and lots of places to hide, fishes like that. They hung out in that chamber, and they avoided the one that was adjoining where they could swim over to, which was brightly lit and barren. And then they caused them, they injected them, 2 groups. One was injected with saline solution, which presumably doesn't cause any lasting pain. The other injected with acid. And they still hung out in this side until they dissolved the painkiller, lidocaine, in the nasty side where they don't generally like to go. And some of the little fishes started swimming over and hanging out there. And guess which ones it was? The ones who got the acid injection. So a very clear illustration that fishes feel pain, that they will take action to relieve it, just as they'll take action to relieve stress. And C, they will pay a cost to get pain relief. They will swim in an area where they would normally avoid, because this is, I don't feel safe here, but I get pain relief. That's an anthropomorphic interpretation, but that's what that study shows. It's a very powerful study designed to show that animals will take action to relieve their pain and pay a cost for it.
All right, let's go to our next question.
I had a question about how you measure, because you mentioned like that fish have emotions, and so, but I'm wondering, is it like emotions in the sense that we would think of them as humans, or just kind of like pleasure and pain?
Sure, yeah. Well, I would think of pleasure and pain as feeling, as sensations rather than emotions. I mean, they're certainly relevant. The emotions, the basic emotions, fear, rage, lust, those are 3 examples of the basic ones that definitely are present in fish behavior. There are still some scientists, a dwindling number, who would argue that, but that doesn't prove they feel emotion. Science doesn't really prove anything. It gives cumulative evidence, and we have to weigh the evidence, and I think the evidence clearly weighs in favor of them having these experiences. Just in terms of fear, fishes actually have a fear chemical. It's called Schreckstoff. It means scary stuff. It's German for scary stuff. And it's released by them. They could be injured, but they also could see something like a predator, and they'll release this Schreckstoff, which seems to be useful to others in the area because they can detect this presence of this, and they'll become much more alert, and they're looking around for where's the danger, oh, there's the predator over there. So that's an example of a signal that they use that's fear-induced.
Hey, I have a question about the fishing or commercial fishing industry. So I think it's clear that in order to find solutions for overconsumption and a general lack of concern for fishes, we need to work with fishermen, and there's a huge pushback about fishermen's livelihoods in terms of finding these solutions, so I was interested to hear your response on that concern.
Yeah, really important question. I don't really have a clear answer for that. It's not something I've given a lot of thought to. I think it needs to be addressed. People need to make a living, and it's disruptive to have to change your career. Ultimately, it's just in a supply and demand economy. I'm hopeful that there will be a reducing demand for these products, at least in Western cultures where we have more choices. And that is going to cause some disruptions in what careers are done. But you look at whale watching, I mean, that's something, whaling, the number of people employed by whaling, I don't know the numbers, but I think the number employed by whale watching is certainly competitive with that. So when we eliminate one exploitive industry, we can open up new niches that can provide jobs for people who used to be in the exploitive side of things. So.
And hopefully benefits like health insurance and paid time off and things that fishers don't get.
Yeah, I didn't mention it today. I sometimes do, but you may have heard of the slaving on some fishes. Some Asian fishing boats there. Not only are they poaching, there's some that poach that are doing it illegally, but they also have illegal people on board who don't get paid and who are enslaved for long periods, including underage people.
Yeah, so. Slavery and forced work is part of the fishing industry. All right, we have 3 more questions and we have time for it. And just a reminder, we will have a book signing afterwards.
Thank you so much for your work. It's amazingly important, and thank you so much.
Sure.
So that first. So I think we are pretty clear on who the bad guys are. I'm wondering if there are any senators or if there are any representatives or other people we can support who are working on this, and maybe we can make some calls. Is there a specific piece of legislation? Is there anything where we can take action that would be conducive to kinder treatment?
Yeah, I wish I had a more concrete answer for that. I can tell you that I just read a really cool booklet that's being produced by World Animal Net. It's called, it's a model Animal Welfare Act. It's like what would be the ideal kind of Animal Welfare Act, informed by science and ethics, and it's written in such a way that it's kind of tailorable to any government system. So I would recommend maybe getting a hold of that if that's an area of interest for you. And it's called, I think it's called the Model Animal Welfare Act, but I'm not certain. You could always email me and I could look it up because I have a copy of it at home. So.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for putting that presentation on. It was very good information. And, you know, of course, a lot of facts and stuff. Of course, what affects people is not always, I guess it's facts along with emotional presentation. And so you have people becoming vegetarian and then vegan, and then some are, even though they give up dairy, they'll become pescatarian, or they only eat fish. And I guess, I don't know, maybe there's this perception that fish are not, well, not just that fish are not, don't feel pain as much, but also this idea of like fish aren't as cute, or what I call it the cuteness factor. And of course, a living creature's value is not just because it's cute or whatever. But with that being said, what I wonder is in terms of promoting the well-being of with a lot of the farm animals, you know, you have those videos by PETA or Mostly for Animals, and then you have the cute videos and stuff. Is there anything being done in terms of promoting the way that fish feel and, you know, how cute they are or whatever, to try to get a lot of, I guess, pescatarians to realize, well, yeah, fish are also, you know, rather than beyond just the, of course, the facts and figures you've presented, but just promotion.
I'm not aware of any particular campaign to try to get people to think differently about fishes through impressing upon them how cute they are. I mean, there's some beautiful videos on YouTube. Bubble Vision sounds flip, but there's some beautiful videos done by the guy who runs that of fishes and how they live and how diverse they are and how colorful they are. So I would love to actually put together a bunch of short animated videos that sort of illustrate some of the points I've made. I'm an ethologist, it's my field, so I tend to focus on what the animals do rather than how we can afford the politics to get things changed. Very important. We have to leverage this information to that, but I feel like that's somebody else's job. I'll happily testify and whatever else, but we need these efforts. We need any social movement benefits from diversity, so we need a whole range of efforts. But I would love to see a series of 2 to 3 minute animated, funny, entertaining. I don't know if you've ever seen True Facts About the Octopus, True Facts About the Naked Mole Rat. Hilarious. Z. Frank narrates them. The footage is fantastic. It has lovely classical music to accompany it. That's another approach where you can raise the status of creatures in a way that's appealing and entertaining.
Well, the great thing is now...
I'll let her handle it. Go ahead.
The great thing is now, Jonathan, you have a room full of people who can go be those ambassadors, who can help with the marketing, who can help with the message, who can develop their own content, who can have one-on-one conversations. I loved the moray one with the grouper that you showed. Like, I definitely got a picture of that. All right, our final question, and then we'll have our book signing.
Thank you. So I was looking at the picture you showed with the 2 fishes and how one had been affected by stress, and I was just kind of wondering like how that happens. Is it a change in the genotype and phenotype, or just mutations, or how does that work?
Which one was this, the study where they put them in the tanks with the moving?
It was like the slide. Sorry, I came in a little bit late. I got lost.
Okay, I have.
But it was towards the end, and there was like one fish.
Oh, that, yeah, okay. And what was the question? I'm sorry.
Like, so there was one fish that had changed its appearance based on the stress.
Well, it had shrunk. It had stopped eating. It's called a dropout. And basically, it becomes depressed and listless and doesn't even take any interest in surviving and just literally dies. They float to the surface. So it's extreme stress, and the paper that was published summarized it as severe depression was the interpretation that they had based on the cortisol levels and the behavior.
On that depressing note, thank you, Jonathan.
Sure.
No, in all fairness, that was an outstanding presentation. Okay, so now, as promised, we're going to have our book signing just in the lobby, so head out there to get your copy and get it signed. Jonathan's ready to chat with you. Our next presentation in this room is in 1 hour. We're going to hear from the award-winning bodybuilder, Tori Washington. I'll see you in an hour.